The episode was called The New Toy. It begins on a normal morning. Peppa wakes up, walks downstairs, has breakfast with her family, and then goes back to her room to play. George is downstairs playing with his dinosaur, Mummy is cleaning in the kitchen, and Daddy Pig is reading his newspaper. Everything feels calm and familiar. Peppa walks into her room and starts placing her toys on the carpet. She takes out her doll, some blocks, and her little toy house. But then she notices something new on the shelf. There is a small plush pig sitting there. It is pink, with soft ears and a tiny smile. Peppa stops and looks at it. She says, "I don't remember this toy." She picks up the little plush pig and examines it carefully. "Hello," Peppa says to the toy. "Are you mine?" Then she walks downstairs and shows it to Mummy. "Mummy, is this my toy?" Peppa asks. Mummy looks at the plush pig and answers calmly. "Of course, Peppa. You've always had that toy." Peppa looks surprised. "Always?" "Yes," Mummy says. "You used to play with it a lot." Peppa frowns slightly. She tries to remember, but she can't. "That's strange. I don't remember it at all." Daddy Pig looks up from his newspaper and smiles. "Sometimes we just forget about old toys," he says. Peppa nods, but she still feels like something isn't quite right. She goes back to her room and places the toy on the shelf. Then she continues playing with her other toys. The rest of the day passes normally. Peppa and George play together, the family eats dinner, and in the evening, Peppa goes to bed. Before falling asleep, she looks at the shelf. The plush pig is still sitting exactly where she left it. "Good night," Peppa says, and turns off the light. During the night, the room is quiet. Moonlight shines through the window and falls softly on the floor and the toys. In the morning, Peppa wakes up and sits on her bed. She looks around the room, and then she notices something. The plush pig is no longer on the shelf. Now it is lying on the carpet. Peppa slowly gets up and walks closer. "But I put you on the shelf," she says quietly. She picks up the toy and places it back where it was. Then she goes downstairs for breakfast. During the day, everything seems normal again. Peppa plays, draws pictures, and reads a book. But every now and then she looks up at the shelf. The toy is still there. That evening she goes to bed again. Before closing her eyes, she checks the shelf one more time. The plush pig is sitting exactly where she left it. But the next morning, Peppa wakes up and notices something strange again. This time the toy is sitting on the chair beside her bed. Peppa slowly walks over to it. "I definitely didn't put you here." She looks at the toy for a few seconds. Then she quietly says, "Maybe. It's just my imagination." But before leaving the room, Peppa turns around, and for a moment, it almost feels like the little plush pig is looking right at her. The episode was called The Day That Repeats. It begins on a normal morning in Peppa Pig's house. Peppa wakes up, walks downstairs, and sees Daddy Pig sitting at the table reading his newspaper. Mummy Pig is making breakfast, and George is sitting on the floor playing with his dinosaur. Everything looks completely normal. Daddy Pig lifts his head and says, "Good morning, Peppa." Mummy smiles and says, "Breakfast is ready." Peppa sits down, eats her breakfast, and then walks to school. At school, everything seems normal too. The children sit at their desks, the teacher begins the lesson, Pedro raises his hand, and Suzy whispers something to Peppa. After the lesson, everyone goes outside for recess and plays in the schoolyard. The day goes by calmly, and in the evening, Peppa returns home. She has dinner with her family, plays a little with George, and then goes to bed. But the next morning, something strange happens. Peppa wakes up again and hears Daddy's voice from the kitchen. "Good morning, Peppa." She walks downstairs and sees the exact same scene. Daddy Pig is sitting with his newspaper. Mummy Pig is making the same breakfast. George is playing with his dinosaur in the same spot. Everything looks exactly the same as yesterday. Peppa frowns. "We already did this yesterday," she says. But Daddy Pig just smiles and says again, "Good morning, Peppa." Peppa begins to notice more strange things. At school, Pedro raises his hand at the exact same moment. Suzy says the same words. Even the teacher asks the same questions. During recess, the children play the exact same game. Peppa tries to change things. She answers questions earlier than before. She says different words. She suggests a new game, but the children still behave almost exactly the same way. The next day, everything repeats again. Peppa wakes up. Daddy Pig is reading the same newspaper. Mummy Pig says, "Breakfast is ready." George is playing with his dinosaur. Peppa tries something different. "Daddy, you're about to say good morning," she says. Daddy Pig smiles and replies, "Good morning, Peppa." Peppa looks surprised. At school, she tries to leave the classroom early, but she still ends up in the same place. She looks at the clock on the wall, but the hands barely move. By the end of the day, Peppa feels that something is very wrong. She sits quietly at her desk and whispers, "Why does everything keep repeating?" No one answers. Then Peppa slowly raises her head and looks straight ahead, as if she is looking directly at someone. For a few seconds, she says nothing. Then she quietly asks, "Do you see it too?" And the episode ends. The episode was called The New House. It begins in the morning as the pig family moves into their new home. The house is big, bright, and a little unfamiliar. Peppa, George, Mummy Pig, and Daddy Pig walk inside and start looking around the rooms. Daddy Pig happily says that the house has plenty of space for playing, and Mummy Pig smiles and says that now everyone will have more room. George immediately runs down the hallway with his dinosaur and happily says, "Dinosaur!" Peppa is excited at first too, but she feels that the house is a little too quiet. While Mummy and Daddy unpack boxes, Peppa decides to explore the house. She walks down a long hallway and looks at the doors to different rooms. The house is very quiet, and the only sound she hears is her own footsteps. Suddenly, somewhere upstairs, she hears a small noise. Creak. Peppa stops and listens. She looks up at the staircase. "Mummy?" Peppa asks quietly. But nobody answers. From the kitchen, she can hear the normal sound of dishes. Peppa slowly walks up the stairs to the second floor. There are several rooms. She looks into one room. It's empty. She looks into another. Also empty. Then suddenly, she hears another sound. Tap. It sounds like someone gently knocked on the wall. Peppa frowns a little. "Maybe it's just the house," she says to herself. She walks farther down the hallway. At the end of the hallway, there is a small window. Outside, the wind is gently moving the branches of a tree. When the branches touch the wall, they make a soft sound. Tap, tap. Peppa looks at the branches. "Oh, it's the tree," she says. But just as she is about to leave, she hears another creak, this time from downstairs. Peppa quickly walks down the stairs. George is sitting on the floor playing with his dinosaur. "George, did you hear that noise?" Peppa asks. George looks up. "Noise?" "Yes, like someone walking." George looks around and says, "Dinosaur?" Peppa smiles, but she still feels a little strange. Later in the evening, Peppa walks through the hallway again. The house is darker now, and the windows reflect the light from the lamps. Once again, she hears a quiet sound. Creak. Peppa stops. "Who's there?" she asks softly. Just then, Daddy Pig walks out of a room. "Peppa, what's the matter?" he asks. Peppa looks a little embarrassed. "I think someone is in the house. I keep hearing strange sounds." Daddy Pig smiles and explains calmly. "In new houses, floors, walls, and doors sometimes creak. The house is just getting used to its new family. Mummy Pig walks over and adds, "Sometimes the wind moves branches or windows. Those are normal sounds." Peppa starts to relax. "So it's just the house?" Daddy Pig laughs. "Of course. Sometimes our imagination makes sounds seem scarier than they really are." Peppa looks around the hallway and slowly nods. "I guess it's just imagination." But when the family walks back into the living room, the camera stays in the empty hallway for a moment. A quiet creak can be heard again. The episode ends with Peppa looking back at the hallway and quietly saying, "I guess it's just imagination." But she still looks a little unsure. The episode was called The New Suzy. It begins on a normal morning. Peppa gets ready for school, has breakfast with her family, and walks along the path to school. The weather is calm and everything seems normal. Peppa is smiling because she is excited to see her best friend, Suzy Sheep. But when she arrives in the schoolyard, she immediately notices that something feels different. Suzy is standing a little away from the other children. She is wearing dark sunglasses, even though the sun is not very bright. She doesn't wave to Peppa or run up to her like she usually does. She just stands there quietly, looking in Peppa's direction. Peppa walks closer and says, "Hello, Suzy." Suzy slowly turns her head and replies, "Oh, hello, Peppa." Her voice sounds calm, almost too calm. Peppa is surprised. Usually Suzy laughs right away and starts talking about something exciting. Peppa asks why she is wearing sunglasses. Suzy answers, "Because now I'm different." Peppa isn't sure what that means. During the lesson, Suzy behaves strangely. She sits very straight and barely speaks. When the teacher asks a question, Suzy answers calmly and briefly. During recess, the other children gather around her. Pedro says Suzy looks very cool now. Rebecca agrees, but Peppa begins to feel uneasy. It seems like Suzy has become distant, almost like someone else. Peppa tries several times to talk with her like before. She suggests playing games and running around the playground, but Suzy answers only with short replies or stays silent. Sometimes she just looks at Peppa through the dark glasses, her expression barely changing. Peppa starts to feel a strange tension she can't explain. After school, Peppa invites Suzy to come to her house. She hopes things will go back to normal there. Suzy stays quiet for a moment and then says, "All right." When they arrive, George runs to the door with his dinosaur and happily says, "Suzy." But Suzy only replies softly, "Hello, George," and slowly walks into Peppa's room. Peppa takes out her toys and suggests playing, but Suzy sits quietly and barely laughs. She occasionally looks around the room and adjusts her sunglasses. The house feels strangely quiet. Peppa begins to speak more carefully. "Suzy, are you okay?" Suzy turns toward her and says, "I'm just the new Suzy." Peppa looks at her and softly replies, "I like the old Suzy better." For a few seconds, Suzy says nothing. Then she slowly takes off her sunglasses and suddenly starts laughing like before. "I was joking," she says. "I just wanted to try being cool." Peppa smiles with relief. George shows his dinosaur, and Suzy starts playing with them again. The room feels normal and cheerful once more. In the evening, Suzy says goodbye and walks home along the path. Peppa waves from the door and goes back inside. But as Suzy walks away, she quietly puts the dark sunglasses back on. Her smile fades. Softly, she says to herself, "The new Suzy." She slowly turns her head and looks back toward Peppa's house. At that moment, Peppa is watching her from the window. Their eyes meet for a second. Suzy gives a small smile, but this smile looks very different from the one she had before.